Shabbat Shalom, Good Shabbos, Shalom Aleichem. Before I start with our speaker tonight, I'm just going to present a little service because tonight is the era of the 55th anniversary of Eddie Cantor's death in 1964. And so therefore it's his yard site. So if you'll indulge me, and you'll probably done this many times with grandparents, we're going to do it for Eddie Cantor with the yard site and the secular modern cottage we read at city congregation. May the glory of life be extolled, l'chaim. May the world be blessed with peace, all life hallowed by love and respect, l'chaim. Life be blessed and glorified, exalted and honored, l'chaim. Though beyond praises, songs, and adorations we may utter, let life be celebrated, l'chaim. For us, for all Israel, for all people, may the promise and the gift of life come true, l'chaim. May peace embrace all of us, all Israel, and all the world, l'chaim. May peace be granted us, we who mourn, and be a comfort to all who are bereaved, and let us say, l'chaim. Zecher sadichim levracha, may the memory of a good people, and in this case tonight, a very good person, be for us a blessing. And with that, and hopefully our guest has entered the room in a timely fashion. If not, he'll come on the stage like the old master used to do for his audiences. Sort of, if we can, a show of hands, if I can see everybody, I'm going to go into the gallery, who knows who Eddie Cantor is, remembers Eddie Cantor, or just heard of Eddie Cantor. Sort of just raise your hand in a very, okay, Brian, no cheating, Brian. He's our guest, he's the grandson. Okay, so we have a kind of a wide swath of people who know Eddie Cantor, but we'll clarify it and show something tonight with our guest that you may not know. You know his singing and dancing. You know, Eddie Cantor, by the way, was born in 1892. He died in 1964. And he was one of the most popular, successful entertainers in vaudeville, Broadway, movies, radio, early TV, and near the end of his life, wrote books. He did books as early as 1928. He had a patter of fast, quick action with jokes, songs, and abundant energy. He was known as the Apostle of Pep, essentially Mr. Showbiz, Mr. Energy, I think way before James Brown. He helped the nation during the Great Depression, soothed the worried America in World War II, but there was more. He was born on the Lower East Side by his grandmother, Esther. Isidore Iskowitz, who later became Eddie Cantor, the entertainer, on and off stage, lived a life of social action, especially for the work he is most known for, helping to find a cure for polio, the virus of dread in the 20th century. It was Cantor who coined the March of Dimes to defeat infantile poliomyelitis, infantile paralysis, by encouraging the public to send 10-cent coins, dimes, to help defeat the dreaded disease of childhood. Among his other charitable works was raising funds to help a new nation, Israel, and in today's world, you can call him an activist. In review, a mensch. And before I introduce Brian Gari, I'm just going to define mensch. The definition of mensch, according to Merriam-Webster Dictionary, a person of integrity and honor. So it's my wonderful delight and honor and privilege. Brian Gari, who's going to be with us in a moment, celebrates over 50 years of songwriting, has written almost 900 songs. I don't know if Berlin did that many. His friendship with the great Neil Sedaka produced a collection of Sedaka rarities released under the title The Brooklyn Demos. Brian has produced over a dozen CDs and DVDs on his grandfather, Eddie Cantor, as well as writing a new musical about him, Eddie Cantor, which is previewed in Brian's CD, The Unproduced Eddie Cantor Musical. Brian reminiscence about all the famous people he had encounters with during his lifetime in the book Close Encounters of the Celebrity Kind, Bear Manor Media, which will give you that information later, as well as other websites for further research and entertainment. This book has over 30 stories that include people like Brian Wilson, Neil Sedaka, Little Richard, Dick Clark, the Beatles, and Robin Williams, Soupy Sales, which Brian said with a bow tie reminded him, and we'll talk about that, I'm sure. And of course, his grandfather, Eddie Cantor. just a point of reference, Eddie Cantor grew up in the Lower East Side, as I mentioned, and it's attributed that the Henry Street Settlement House kept him on the straight and narrow. We have a couple of members, I know Marty and Judy, who live not too far from the Henry Street Settlement, which is still active. So without further ado, and maybe he needs a drum roll, which I'm sure there's something, musician and Brian probably has a drum in his apartment. I give you Brian Gari. Hello, Brian. And I think he's muted. See, Eddie Cantor did start in silent film, so we can, okay, there you are, Brian, you there?
Yeah.
How are you?
I'm okay, other than having a kidney stone that's driving me crazy, but other than that, I'm fine.
Okay, that's probably relatable to a lot of our audience. So we have a little Rachmanis for you, a little sympathy. Just to let you know, folks, we're going to have a conversation. We're going to show some pictures. Brian's going to talk about them. He has his own memories and accents on his grandfather. Also, I'll look at the chat, and at the end, we'll answer questions. And if Brian is willing to stick around after the program in our schmooze section, you can ask him some questions very informally. So I guess we'll start. Brian, to you, how would you define and who was Eddie Cantor? As many know him in show business, and families grew up with him on stage, movie, radio, TV. They may not remember who he is or his activism. Can you share a little bit of that to get us started?
Well, yes, but I'd like to make like two minor corrections in your intro.
Okay.
What you might have skipped over is that my grandfather was an orphan by the time he was 2, and that's why his grandmother brought him up. She came over from Minsk, and she had a very successful business as a cigar maker, and she had to give all that up to come to America to help take care of my grandfather, whose mother died and his father kind of disappeared. So
this is Grandma Esther, right?
Yeah, Grandma Esther Kantrowitz, which is how he got the name Cantor. When she went to register him in school, they asked the question, "What's his name?" And she thought they meant her name, so she said Kantrowitz. So he was, Isidore Kantrowitz, and then it was shortened to Cantor. The other thing I wanted to correct was, of course, he didn't just coin the name, the March of Dimes, as you alluded to a little bit, was that he came up with the whole idea because Franklin Roosevelt had asked him to think of some idea, maybe $1,000 a plate dinner would do well. And my grandfather said, well, how about everyone sending in one dime? And then Roosevelt said, well, to what address? And he says, well, you have a very nice address right here. And that's how it became the March of Dimes. So he was much more involved in it than it appears today. It seems as though through the decades, even the March of Dimes itself doesn't really give Eddie Cantor the full credit for starting the March of Dimes.
Thank you for those corrections. I knew I'd be corrected somewhere. If it's not my mother, it could be you, Brian.
Well, it's always fun to correct somebody.
That is, okay. And with that in mind, yes, I mean, I found in my research that Eddie Cantor sent a telegram to, I'm blanking, Dr. Salk about his success in the polio vaccine. And that's also typifies Eddie Cantor's acknowledgement of other people's good works,
Exactly.
Not just his own.
Yeah, he was very complimentary of so many people, which, I know you want to get into the people that he ended up discovering. And that's because of my grandfather's great knowledge and ability to spot talent.
I will get into that. I just wanted to find something. People know him in all his movies, and we're not going to really do his performing years. But one of the things I realized reading about him as a monologist, the old time term for a stand-up, which he did a lot of stand-up as well as singing and dancing and doing his shows. This enabled him, I believe, to talk to audiences clearly, with humor and with force in all his fundraising. Would you say that was a good background for his work later on, from his stand-up or his monology?
You mean doing benefits?
Correct.
Oh, yeah. Well, there wasn't a time when my grandfather would turn down a benefit. He very often would do a whole evening's worth of performing, and then on his way home, stop by a place and do a benefit. So, if it was in the daytime, in the evening, whenever he could squeeze in another performance. I mean, he loved performing, obviously, but he loved communicating with his audience. And that certainly was part of, doing the benefit. He would be Eddie Cantor at these benefits, and it would raise a ton of money.
I don't want to be remiss. I know we showed on our announcements for the program a picture of Eddie Cantor. Kathy, who's our technical person tonight, can you put up that first portrait picture of Eddie Cantor so everyone will just get a lock in on how he can be formal, not just, yeah, that's a nice portrait, Brian, of your grandfather.
It is, most definitely.
And he's always seemed to be well dressed, but also I like this because of the serious side, not the clown, but someone who's, I think, in looking in his eyes and face, he's thinking of you, the world, everything.
Well, it's interesting that you say, his being well dressed. First of all, he and I are both colorblind, and my grandmother had to pick out his clothes for him because he really didn't know what he was wearing. He did want to dress well, and the late talk show host, Joe Franklin, who got to know my grandfather very well, said, what people don't remember is that he was immaculately dressed. The guy had a crease in his pants all the time, and he was really exceptionally well dressed. So, some people did certainly notice that.
I want to jump to another friend from the Lower East Side. Kathy, can you do the next one, number 2, Eddie Cantor? And that fellow, does anybody recognize that fellow to Cantor's right? I know Brian does, but here's another Lower East Side immigrant, well, not like Cantor, but immigrant definitely, who provided a lot of Cantor songs over the years and a lot of other great songs. Just to clarify.
He provided my grandfather with, they both had their first million seller together with a song called You'd Be Surprised.
Yeah, and it's also known Marilyn Monroe sang that in recordings later. But
Marilyn Monroe
go ahead.
You'd Be Surprised?
Yeah, she recorded it. Very sultry too.
Wow.
But that, folks, is Irving Berlin, in case you don't recognize him. This is from about 1936. And how did you get to ever meet Irving Berlin?
No, I never did. I really wish I had, because in later years, I became more knowledgeable about his work. His work was so diverse. It's incredible. I mean, if you think that he wrote White Christmas, but he also wrote Alexander's Ragtime Band, or he wrote When I Lost You, I think that's the exact title, which is such a sad song about, his first wife he was madly in love with, and they went on a trip overseas, and she contracted a disease that killed her as soon as she got back to New York. So there was a part of him that was so torn apart by that situation. He later remarried, but the number of songs that he wrote, and he didn't really have any kind of musical education. So he had a piano that was made for him that had a lever that could change the key of the song. Because as a songwriter, I'll tell you, I write songs in many different keys as to what the feeling is going to be in the song. So I need to change keys. With Irving Berlin, he only played on the black keys. So it really helped him to have this piano where if he pushed the lever, it would change the key of the song. And then he could play the same black keys, but it would be a different key. And the number of songs was so diverse. I mean, You Can't Get a Man with a Gun, isn't that another one? He wrote Annie, Get Your Gun.
But he also provided your grandfather not only with that song, but Mandy from the Ziegfeld Follies in 1917.
That's right.
Which Danny Kaye did in White Christmas, another Berlin. Now, speaking of Berlin and your grandfather, Berlin's real name was Israel Berlin, and your grandfather had a similar. Did they address you? How was your grandfather addressed by friends? Is?
Oh, no, he was always Eddie.
Ah, okay, that clarified that. And do you know if possibly not know, Cantor and Berlin got together, do they ever exchange talk in Yiddish? Because Cantor, your grandfather did know Yiddish, of course.
Oh, yeah. So, no, I would imagine that they probably did speak in Yiddish from time to time. It wouldn't surprise me at all. My grandfather was very proud of his Jewish heritage, and he also did many, many benefits for Jews. In fact, he always had a great joke. Whenever he was asked a question, he would answer in, "Well, is it good for the Jews?" And it's only a joke, but it was a running gag with him. You could say, I had a chocolate milkshake the other day. He says, "Yes, but was it good for the Jews?" It's just a joke that just ran through his life.
We say it too.
But it had a subtext to it. Kathy, can you go to our third slide of 1939? I showed this to Brian the other day. And this, to me, is not the beginning of his working for benefits against tolerance and understanding and anti-Nazism. And this is from 1939 at the Lowe State Theater with a copy of the American Declaration of Tolerance and Equality. So do you know, even I guess it was early in his career, he held up a strike for the Actors Union. So
right.
when he became active then, and when did he really start getting more active as he succeeded in radio and movies?
Well,
his activism?
He did things that when he was at the New Amsterdam Theater doing, I would think either the Ziegfeld Follies or even Whoopi, the struggling actors and people of great strife would line up at the backstage entrance to the theater, and my grandfather would come out and give money to these struggling people, whether they be actors or whether they were, just people that admired him. He was always giving back. He always felt he should give it back. And of course, that, his slogan was, "I don't want to be remembered particularly as, a famous actor or comedian. I'd rather be known as a man, what I did as a man." And that was most important to him.
We have a series of photos, cueing Kathy, pardon me, folks, and Brian. So can you go to the next one? We're at the Cantor giving out tickets, and then just go through a few minutes on the next three. Cantor giving out tickets to Anti-Nazi League Rally, 1936. That's very early to really buck against what's happening in Germany. That's quite early before the war. Do you have any reflections on that work he did so early?
Well, I do. A couple of things I have to say about that. On his radio show, in the very beginning of what was going on overseas, my grandfather was singing a song with lyrics by the Tobias fam, probably Charlie Tobias, I believe, if I've got this in my memory.
That's Ida's brother?
Ida's cousin.
Cousin, thank you.
And the Tobias brothers, Charlie, Henry, and Harry, were the songwriting brothers, and they wrote a lot of hit songs, either individually or in collaboration with one or other of the others. But there is a song called "Let Them Keep It Over There," which is a really wrong way of going about dealing with the war and what was going on. And my grandfather quickly changed his literal tune and changed his mind about what his attitude was. He realized that it was much more serious against his own heritage, and that they were killing or about to kill Jews. And he was extremely nervous about this whole situation. So the song was dropped. He never did that song after that. "Let Them Keep It Over There" was not done anymore. Other songs were written for him that would reflect what he really should have been saying about the war and Hitler's taking over. And one of the things my grandfather did was that he traveled overseas, and he literally helped get Jewish people on boats and into safe areas away from the Nazi takeover. He literally did.
That's a great segue to the next slide, Kathy, about Jewish refugees. And while that's coming up, you also at this time, or maybe later, Brian, on his radio show, he started saying little anti-German or Germany things, and he got into hot water from time to time with the network folks, didn't he? Or and sponsors such.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'll mention that. I don't want to forget about one particular song that I did not write and Eddie didn't sing. It's a song by a guy named Michael Garin. Believe it or not, it's one letter more than my last name. And he wrote a song called Eddie Cantor Saved My Mother's Life. And it's actually recorded. It's on a CD. I was shocked and extremely pleased to hear it. It's a brilliant piece of writing because it was literally a true story that his mother was saved because of Eddie Cantor's work overseas. And he mentioned the fact in the song that he wouldn't have been born if it weren't for Eddie Cantor. So I just want to mention that. That song never gets mentioned, and I don't really know Michael all that well, but I certainly love that song. Anyway, now getting back to your question about getting into trouble. Yes, he got in trouble because
I guess we should say these days, good trouble.
Yeah, right, exactly. To quote John Lewis. Yeah, it was at the New York World's Fair, I believe, and it was Father Coughlin, who was a Nazi sympathizer. And, you know, you're not supposed to attack a man of the cloth, but my grandfather didn't care, and he spoke up. Now, don't forget, my grandfather was the hottest thing in radio. So, you know, his saying this kind of stuff to Father Coughlin or about Father Coughlin got a lot of hate mail from people that I guess didn't like Jews or were in favor of the man of the cloth. So what happened was his sponsor came to him and said, if you don't apologize for this, we're going to take you off the air. And that's when he said, first, I'm Eddie Cantor, the man. Second, I'm Eddie Cantor, the entertainer. So do what you want to do. And they took him off the air for almost 2 years.
Was this at the same time he had a run-in with Henry Ford and his anti-Semitism, or it came later? Or earlier, rather. I'm sorry, earlier.
Probably, yeah. My grandfather spoke up. You know, the great thing about my grandfather is that he spoke out. I have the same attitude, but I get into trouble and I stay in trouble. You know, the unfortunate thing is that unless you have really strong clout, like my grandfather had, you can't, it's hard to speak out about injustices and things that you believe in, because you could get into a heap of trouble and you might not recover from that. I mean, I remember speaking out about things at nightclubs and the way people were being treated, and I wasn't asked back again, and I wouldn't get put on stage. And what was I to do? There's no way to really fight back unless you're number one, like my grandfather was number one. So, you know,
I guess he had a good bully pulpit, so to speak.
He what?
A bully pulpit. He had a good seat to speak up, and because he was so famous and well liked too.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, he was lucky. I wish everyone in this country or in this world had that kind of clout and did it for the right reason, you know?
True. We're about to mentioning all those outspokenness. The next slide is going to indicate some indication and return of his work. And this was 1945, but this is kind of what early to mid of his reflection of his good works. And there more came later, I know, but this is 1945, and the war was still on. And this is just a citation representing many other awards he got all over the country. This is in Colorado.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah.
And so as far as these benefits, I know for a while he was off the air for about a year or so in 1939, 1940. So was this the time he started revising his whole outlook and doing more benefits and the oncoming war? We weren't isolationists anymore. War was looming. And of course, December 7th.
Well, I don't know if he did any more work. I mean, he was constantly working. You know, he almost never took time off. That's the thing. And it was extremely admirable. It was Jack Benny who got him back on the air, because the sponsor came to to Jack Benny and said, you know, Fred Allen is not going to come back to radio because he's annoyed that his hour-long show will have to be a half an hour. You know, this is what was going on. You know, if you think about the attention span today, you know, how, you know, they go in and out of commercials so quickly, or they put the end credits into tiny boxes. That's the attention span, what was happening with in the 40s on the radio. And Fred Allen refused to go on the air unless he had his hour-long show. So they dropped him, and they didn't know who they'd get. And Jack Benny says, I think you should ask Eddie Cantor to come back. And they said, do you think he'd do it? And he says, I think so. And my grandfather came back immediately.
So at this time in early 40s, when he's back on radio after Benny's help, and Benny was also another huge star for those who don't remember on radio, another huge radio performer. So what did Cantor matter to America, the media, certainly Jews, and his causes? What's all the nexus of his work, his performance, his persona all factor in? Can you?
What do you mean exactly?
In the public eye, who was Cantor to everybody, or even just, or separately to the Jews?
Cantor was like, people worshiped him. I mean, everybody, you know, they say that when you would go down an alley and the windows were open on a hot evening and it was Sunday night at 8 o'clock, all radios were turned on to the Eddie Cantor show. You would hear it blasting from every window. He was number one in every facet of his career. Everyone worshiped him. And because he was a very kind man. But he also was very, very particular about his persona and the writing of the show and the direction he wanted to go in. He was very meticulous when it came to that. I always admired that. You know, he wrote me a letter in 1964, a few months before he died, saying, I believe you're the one that's going to go on to carry the show business tradition of this family. And as it turns out, not only did I end up with a musical on Broadway that I wrote the words and music for, but I carried on the tradition of Eddie Cantor as far as his work goes. I got his books republished, and I got his movies out again and his recordings, some very rare recordings. I put out his old radio shows and just some incredible stuff that you normally would never have gotten if it had not been for my trying to make sure that my grandfather got recognized for all his work.
Yeah, that's something else too. He was also a very prolific recording star, especially the 20s on acoustic and then electric recordings after 1928. And I just want to slip in here for those who don't know, when they watch a Warner Brothers Merry Melody cartoon, you do the rest, Brian. Tell them what that means.
Well, in 1935, he co-wrote a song. He wrote mostly the music, and he wrote da 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 da. He wrote that song, and he did it on his radio show, 1935. And Warner Brothers came to him, I believe, later that year, and said, "We'd like to use that in our cartoons." And he was, thrilled. It was, he was never really a big songwriter, but he did contribute to songs. In fact, his cousin, Ida's cousin, Henry Tobias, said, remember that Eddie Cantor was never a cut-in, which is somebody that gets their name put on songs where they really didn't write it. He says, Eddie always really wrote. When his name went on something, it's because he really wrote it. Not like Jolson. Jolson has his name on a million songs that he had nothing to do with. And even Milton Berle used to say when he'd come into the office at NBC and he'd go in to see the songwriters and he'd say, well, what did I write today? So
officially, that song you mentioned for the merry-go-round go broke, right?
No, that's a different song.
Oh,
you're talking about the merry-go-round broke down, and
yeah.
that's a different song.
Well, another in the catalog. So with all this, and I want to, Kathy, can you do the next thing, a picture with the New Jersey rally with the Hadassah group? which is very typical. We won't stay on this long, but this probably is a picture you've seen a million times, Brian, on all the Hadassah, all the Banjo Eyes, all the philanthropy works, always wearing the tuxedo with all various organizations. This is very typical.
Yeah,
I
is there a way that I can make this bigger on my screen?
You'll have to ask technical people. I don't know what you're working with, but there's not anybody in particular next to. The next picture has somebody you'll recognize, and I think it's bigger. So I just want to, so let's go to the next one, Kathy, please. And Kathy, you've been terrific here. Okay, here's somebody on the far right, or his left, that everyone recognizes in 1950, talking about his work with various religious organizations. This is 1950 in Boston with Eleanor Roosevelt. Can you say anything about Eleanor and Eddie here?
Well, they were big time lovers. No, I'm kidding. No, I don't really know if they, obviously they had a connection because of Franklin Roosevelt, but I don't know of anything other than the fact that my grandfather participated in many, many events and fundraising events, and this was probably one of them, right?
Correct. And about this time, for the next slide, because I'm looking at the cuckoo clock here, or the merry-go-round clock, if you wish. The next one, Kathy, this is when I think he started working and touring and raising funds for UJA for Israel. And this is, I think, if I'm correct, Brian, at the same time, he did a film for UJA fundraising that you can find on YouTube, where he travels and he's walking around everywhere. But this must have been go ahead.
This was around the time of his one-man show, Cantor at Carnegie Hall, which is a fascinating recording of his life in I guess the theater, or his entire life. It's a retrospective. And so in 1950, he did a lot of things concerning charity events, as usual, and talking about his life. And of course, he did a lot of work with funding Surprise Lake Camp, where he spent several weeks as a child.
Oh, I forgot all about that. Explain that work for Surprise Lake Camp from his youth to even today. It's still going on, and his commitment to kids who needed a place to spend a summer. Can you just, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, so surprise us about Surprise Lake Camp for a minute, and we're gonna go for a couple of things and try to call it an evening soon, so we have a few more items. And I can't see any chat questions, but think about those folks, and we'll ask Brian in about 10 minutes. Okay, I'm sorry, Brian, about Surprise Lake Camp.
Yes, he spent a couple of weeks there as a kid, and he auditioned and did a song to win an extra week at the camp. He says, I never saw so much green other than on a pool table. And he really loved Surprise Lake Camp. I mean, it was fresh air. It was taking him off the streets of New York City. And, it led him on a very good path. And when he got wealthy, he supported the camp, and they named their theater after him. And there wouldn't be a Surprise Lake Camp anymore if it weren't for all the funding from Eddie Cantor.
Thank you. I'm glad you brought that up. So Kathy, we're going to now move a little to some of his other more obvious work and breaking down certain barriers, because he's a fellow. The impression is that if he didn't care what Father Coughlin said on the radio and he talked back, certainly he wanted to bring people together. And he was one of the first, or the first, to have Sammy Davis Jr. and the Will Maston trio on Colgate Comedy Hour. And this was featured, by the way, you may have seen it, folks, in the last couple of weeks. They showed on PBS the Sammy Davis Jr. documentary that had a big chunk about Eddie Cantor and Sammy Davis Jr. So Brian, I know this is a rehearsal photo. It wasn't the actual show probably, but what can you say about that moment in TV time and Cantor and Sammy Davis Jr., among others?
Well, I haven't seen that special for a while, but I imagine they used a clip of mine of Sammy Davis on the Colgate Comedy Hour, which was February 17th, 1952. And the reason why I know that so well is that was a day before I was born. And my grandfather loved Sammy Davis. he gave him a Jewish piece of jewelry. What is it?
Hi.
Yeah, I think you wear it around your neck.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, he gave that to him. And when Sammy Davis was in the horrendous car crash where he lost his eye, and my grandfather went to see him in the hospital, Sammy revealed to him, he says, that was the only time I took off the chai. It was very sad. Let me see here.
So, just as a kind of point of reference, was it more Eddie Cantor that created an environment for Sammy Davis Jr. to convert or adopt Judaism than Jerry Lewis? Or is it
Probably. Yeah, I mean, Jerry Lewis adored my grandfather too, and surprised him one time, kissed him right on the lips, which shocked my grandfather. But
that was way before All in the Family, huh?
Yeah, it was really it was kind of strange for my grandfather, but anyway, he did discover a lot of people and gave them big breaks. Sammy Davis being one of the top ones, of course. Eddie Fisher, Thelma Carpenter, Dinah Shore,
Bobby Breen.
Nobody really.
And you mentioned somebody else the other day, and I can't remember. I don't remember who it was. I wasn't as familiar, by the way, but there were countless, I'm sure.
Right. Yeah.
Kathy, can you go to the next picture of the Garden of Awards, I call it? Yeah, I love this picture for so many reasons, but it also, and we talked about it, created quite a frustration. Something you told me with all these wonderful awards, and is there an Oscar in here somewhere?
Yeah, there's an Oscar. He got an honorary Oscar in 1957, and that was stolen out of the UCLA archives, as well as probably other things, as you know, I would imagine. I don't know where any of those things are.
But what was brilliant about his acceptance speech, he was very humble, very short, because you said, I think he had, well, at that time he had a lot of heart trouble. And so he was very quick, but very heartfelt and short, and he was very humble about it, extremely humble for such a huge amount of work. And we're going to conclude with something in the next slide that you're going to have a very, very familiar and emotional feeling about. This is Brian at what age?
2.5.
Okay, and you told me a wonderful stuff about this, so we're going to sort of wrap it up, and we'll take a couple of chat questions, or if we have a couple of ones, we'll take it live, and then we'll kind of wrap up by about 9. So if you want to join us later, that's up to you. So tell us about what's going on here. And
well, I was posing at my grandfather's house with my grandfather for the Heart Fund because my grandfather had a major heart attack in 1952 when I was born, and then and he was 60 years old. When I turned 60, my wife had noticed that my breathing was a little off and sent me to a cardiologist. And 2 days later, I had open heart surgery. So I probably would not be here today talking to you had my grandfather not raised all this money for the Heart Fund. And he called himself a cardiactor. And
say that again, a cardiactor?
Yes, yes. He coined so many phrases, and that's one of them. And if it weren't for his work, I believe there would be no heart operation for me because they gave me a quadruple bypass. That was done because of all the work and all the money that was raised from the Heart Fund via my grandfather's incredible work for the Heart Fund.
It's very poetic that his work, and when you were young and he was on the decline, really has a link to you today. And how can we try to remember, or should remember, all his work that we can still reflect today? Obviously, with his work against polio, we have the COVID. We don't have anybody fundraising or being as pronounced to help and solve like an Eddie Cantor today. We really could use somebody with that spirit and that outlook and that drive to.
Yes, we could. And I think it's being done by many different people right now, collectively, not as collectively, and not as much as one person. And by the way, that picture is on the cover of my book called A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to My Stress Test.
Another transition for, I want you to talk about your books and availability. So while we're in this mode, please.
Yeah, this iPad keeps saying low battery, so I hope it doesn't run out on me.
Make sure it's the machine, not you.
Yeah, can you see me now?
Yes.
Oh, okay, good. I don't know why it's, you know.
Oh, I have a quick question before you talk about your books. When you were a kid or maybe older, were you able to imitate him, or did you imitate him in shows and in front of family?
No, never. And in fact, you know, occasionally I get asked to do that, and I really don't do that. The closest I get is doing something at the Jolson. There's a Jolson convention that happens most every year, and I sometimes sing my grandfather's songs, or one or two songs occasionally. And also I did some with Vince Giordano and the Nighthawks here in New York. But I don't,
cheesy, not cheesy at all. That's a good group. You're in good company.
Yeah, but I don't imitate him. Nobody can duplicate Eddie Cantor as far as I'm concerned.
Fair enough. Now tell me about your stress test book, and you have your other books, your other couple books, and you have tons of CDs and DVDs on Cantor and your own career. So let's wrap it up with Brian Gari.
Okay, well, basically, I had a musical on Broadway called Late Night Comic. That's available in the 20th anniversary edition with very many famous people, including Mario Cantone and Liz Callaway and Rupert Holmes and Seth Rudetsky, so many famous people. And also, and Karen Ziemba, but, 17 famous people on that album. But I've also made many albums on my own, singing my own songs. I did an album called The Unproduced Eddie Cantor Musical, which is a collection of songs for a proposed musical on the life of my grandfather. I have several books out. One is called We Bombed in New London, which all my books are, by the way, and my mother's books, Janet Cantor Gari.
Oh, yeah. I'm sorry, Brian. I wanted to mention about your mother and sisters, which are integral part of his career as well as your life. Your mother is Janet, who's the youngest of the Cantor girls.
Right. And she has 4 books with Bear Manor Media, and I have 3 books with Bear Manor Media. My second book, as I said, was A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to My Stress Test. And the third one is called Close Encounters of the Celebrity Kind. And it's got, in honor of John Lennon today and his birthday today, where he would have 80. Yeah. I wrote about my experience with him and with Brian Wilson and a lot of famous people, Johnny Mathis, and so many wonderful stars, Danny Thomas, Georgie Jessel, but also a lot of current people as well. And as I say, you can find a lot of this at eddiecantor.com or at my website, which is briangari.com, and it's BRIANGARI.
And Kathy, I think we'll make sure we post it or get people to know it, whether in the chat or for inquiries. So these are great reads. So I'm going to start slightly switching to wrap things up with a Q&A. I'm going to take a couple from the chat, Brian. So our own Rabbi asked about what would you consider to be your grandfather's legacy for today, 2020?
Well, the fact that he started the March of Dimes, I think, is, if you want to refer to a legacy situation, that certainly is one of them.
Okay, that's yeah, and they're obviously
that is
available.
A great and enduring legacy. Thank you.
Right.
Oh, that was the rabbi going in. You know what? I don't have much of the chat. Anybody, but if we can, is it possible, Kathy? If anybody has a question, we'll spend 5 minutes for a couple of questions and then wrap it up. So
yes, if anyone wants to, they can unmute.
Okay. Well,
so if anyone has
pick
any
people
questions
to speak, and we'll try to make it a question instead of a MISA, because we want to try to wrap it up on a good hour. It's been a long, fatiguing week. And Brian, have you had dinner, Brian?
Yes, I had
good.
dinner.
Okay.
Thank you.
But he wants dessert, folks. Okay. So let's see if anybody has a question. Like they say for Cabernet, let's bump up the lights. And let's see. And if you unmute yourself, just fire away because I can't see everyone. while we're waiting for a question, I don't know if you see one, Kathy, let me know. So Brian, what is your grandfather's favorite song?
That he sang?
Oh, yeah, let's see, sang.
Probably Making Whoopee.
That's not a bad one.
Right. Making Whoopee.
That's a great one. Okay. I always like If You Knew Susie. Oh, someone asked who he was married to. Well, of course, that's a meatball pitch. This is from Betty. Brian, who was your grandmother?
My grandmother was Ida, maiden name Ida Tobias. And of course, he sang that famous song, Ida, Sweet as Apple Cider.
And they married what, about 1914, and she died about 2 years before your grandfather.
That's
correct?
true. Yes. August of 1962.
Yeah, it was not those years weren't good to your grandfather, but I don't want to end it on a down note, but I know one of your aunts died and then your grandmother and
Yeah.
and as we're honoring him tonight for the yard site, he died in 64, this very day.
Right. Well,
Um,
tomorrow, actually.
Oh, it's the 11th? Right,
No.
it's tonight. We celebrate with the end of this, when the sun goes down, we consider it the next night, but you're right,
Okay.
actually.
Right.
Let's see, anybody have any more questions? A raised hand? A question? You don't want me to sing the songs. I know a lot of the songs. You don't want me to sing those songs, folks. I even know the verses. Here she comes, here she comes. You know, I'm not going to do that to you, Brian.
Well, somebody just said they
So Brian, I have a question.
Oh, Kathy,
Yeah.
okay.
What is your grandfather's legacy mean to you?
Well, I'm
Obviously,
thrilled.
it's influenced your career, but you know.
I'm thrilled that that as a human being, he's known, or he has a legacy of being a good guy, and I'm proud of that. I'm proud that he was a humanitarian, and that he cared about people that much. And you know, it makes a big difference as to, you know, how I look at life and how I do things and everything. I really take a nod from him.
Yeah, I think we can use the Hebrew word for Eddie Cantor. He worked on Tikkun Olam, trying to repair the world, fix the world, mend the world, even when it's very unpopular around him, especially the 30s.
Right.
It's a very good lesson.
Absolutely.
You
Okay.
have two comments from John over here.
Oh, you found something. Okay, go, Rabbi.
You have two comments here from John. So John's thanking you, Brian, for a fascinating presentation, and he is eager to buy your books.
Oh, yeah.
And
Yeah, you got a fan out in Oregon, Brian.
Oh, that's good.
I
Yeah,
like Ma. He's making eyes at me.
Yeah, I love that song.
Could you talk a little bit more about his music? You've mentioned a few titles. Could you remind us of others?
Well, he adored songwriters, people like Walter Donaldson, Harry Ruby. Trying to think of some of the other. He discovered songwriters. You know, he had Frank Lesser and a lot of people on his radio show. He would give them a break. In fact, in his books, there's a whole chapter on songwriters because he simply adored songwriters. And it's so ironic that exactly 56 years ago, when he died, is when I wrote my first song, and I consider my profession a songwriter. So here was a profession that he admired so tremendously, and he participated in as a songwriter. But how wonderful to be a songwriter as I am, knowing that my grandfather's admiration was tremendous for songwriters.
Thank you. So one last question, and then we'll wrap it up because you know, every show business performer knows when to get off the stage when the audience is good, and Cantor knew that. And I'm very tempted, Brian, to start going.
Right.
I won't go to show. We'll talk about humanitarianism. Now that was for John. Okay, I don't see any other questions. Any other hands raised? No. Okay. Well, it sounds good here, Brian. I want to thank you for an amazing evening. I want to also thank not only you, Brian, and your grandfather and your grandmother, and like George M. Cohen. We thank you. We thank your mother. We thank everybody. But also a very special thanks to Henry Finkelstein, who was very inspirational in alerting me to Cantor's, your grandfather's humanitarian work for Israel, for actors, for during the Depression about raising money for those unemployed, the unemployment drive. There's a short film found on YouTube, which is absolutely striking how someone in such position is still thinking of the working person and during the Depression. I also want to thank Kathy and Marcia for doing the technical stuff. And so, Brian, we're going to end it here, but you're more than welcome, if you wish, to join us for a very informal schmooze afterwards, answer a couple questions, do a couple songs, taking a couple turns. But for now,
I think we should all give Brian a round of applause.
Yes, a round of applause.
They'll come for encores, you know, don't worry.
The sound of one hand clapping.
Well, we're a big group and we appreciate it. So thank you, everybody, for indulging in a trip down memory lane, but also with a future cast of what we can do ourselves. So I'm going to take a little pause here so they can.
And by the way, if somebody like John or anybody else wants any of my stuff, my mother's, mine, I'd be happy to sign anything that they purchase from me directly at briangary.com. They just have to write to me and tell me, you know, how to get in touch with them.
Excellent. You'll have a wonderful time revisiting Eddie Cantor, listening to Brian Gary's music and his books. So we'll stop it here. Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much, Brian. This has been months in the making, and we honor your grandfather tonight, and we honor you. You honor him, we honor you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.